So again, a couple of homeworks due this Friday, and then Unit 3 tests also due this Friday. So if you remember what we were doing last time, we said weights don't really give you an accurate understanding of power in a weighted voting system, okay? Because in this voting system, every voter, well, in this example here, every voter had a certain weight, but A had all the power, okay? Like 100% of the power. So weights aren't really a good measure of power systems. There are a few different measurements on power. The Bonds-Off Power Index is the one that we were going to focus on, and that's the only one we're going to do in this class. There are others as well, but the Bonds-Off Power Index is the only one we're going to look at, right? And the Bonds-Off Power Index is basically where we look at critical voters for each winning coalition. So we list out all the winning coalitions and we count the number of times each voter is a critical voter. That's what we call the critical count. And then the Bonds-Off Power Index for that voter is their critical count divided by the sum of all critical counts. In other words, what that's giving them is the ratio of how many times they were important compared to how many times every individual was important. Okay. So we did this one last time, and we saw that B, C, and D all had a critical count of 4, and A had a critical count of 0. So B, C, and D ended up with 4/12 of the power apiece, and A had 0 power in this system, okay, with quota being 21. And again, that's interesting because you think, well, B has more weight than D, but they ended up with the exact same power. Right? A had weight, but ended up with no power at all. So we're going to do a couple other examples today. And check those things out. So let's do this example. This is example 3. And you can see A, B, C, D. We have 18 plus 15 plus 6 plus 4. Total votes, so that's 43 votes. And let's make the quota be 22. So that's basically a 50, just over 50%, right? So the quota is just over 50%. If the quota is 22, let's look at all of the winning coalitions. So I start by looking at each individual. No single individual can win by themselves. No single individual has 22 votes. So let's look at pairs of individuals. So I start with A and B. Yes, A and B weights add up to more than 22. About A and C? Yeah, 18 and 6, that adds up to more than 22. So A and C are a winning coalition. A and D adds up to 22, so A, D is also a winning coalition. Let's look at other pairs. What about B and C? Well, B and C add up to 21, that doesn't get us to the quota. B and D add up to 19, that doesn't get us to the quota. So B and D and B and C are not winning coalitions. And then obviously C and D don't get me to 22, they only get me to 10, so CD is not a winning coalition. So I'm going through all the pairs asking. Now let's go through all the triples. How about A, B, C? Well, yeah, A, B, C is a winning coalition. How about A, B, D? Yeah, A, B, D is a winning coalition. A, C, D is a winning coalition. And then it turns out B, C, D is also a winning coalition. So if you ever drop one of the voters, if you drop A, or if you drop B, or if you drop C, or if you drop D, all triples are winning coalitions. And then obviously the last coalition that wins is if all of them vote to pass, if all 4 voters. So I listed out all the winning coalitions. Now I'm going to create a table with the critical counts. You guys remember doing that last time? So I'm going to create a table with critical counts. I think it's going to look better if I do that via computer, meaning if I just copy a table and put it on the overhead. So that's what I'm going to do. Try that. Good. Might need more. I don't know. What's that? That's weird. Okay. So when we say, let me write these down. A, B, A, C, A, D, A, B, C was a winning coalition. A, B, D was a winning coalition. A, C, D was. B, C, D was. And then A, B, C, D was. By the way, if I give you a table to fill out, it's not always going to be the case that the number of winning coalitions are going to be exactly equal to the size of the table. Right? You might have less. Some. So let's look at our first winning coalition and decide which are critical. A and B, in this case, are both critical. Because if you drop A out, B by itself does not win. If I drop B out, A by itself does not win. Obviously, C and D aren't in that, so they're not critical to that winning coalition. Then I look at AC. A and C are both needed because if I drop one of them out, the single voter A doesn't win, the single voter C doesn't win. Look at AD. If I drop A out, I lose. If I drop D out, we lose. A, B, C. This one's interesting. If I drop A out, that winning coalition now loses because BC is not in the previous winning coalitions. You see that? So A is important. However, if you drop B out, AC still is a winning coalition. It exists up here, right? So dropping B out was fine. So B was not critical. And similarly, if you drop C out, you get AB. Well, AB was already winning coalition. So C is not critical either. D is not in there, so it's not critical. So in the ABC coalition, A was critical, but nothing else was. Same thing with ABD. You're going to find that if you drop A out, BD does not win. So A was important. If you drop B out, AD still wins. So B is not important, not critical. C isn't in there. And then D, if you drop D out, AB still wins. So D was not critical either. We're getting the same thing with ACD. If I drop A out, CD does not win. If I drop C out, AD still wins. So C is not critical. If I drop D out, AC still wins. There you go. On this one, BCD, if I drop B, CD does not win. So B is critical. Also, if you drop C, BD does not win, so C is critical. If I drop D out, BC does not win, so D is critical. And in that very last, what happens when I roll around. In that very last coalition with all 4 voters, if you drop A out, B, C, D still win, so A is not critical. If I drop B out, A, C, D still wins, so B is not critical. If I drop C out, A, B, D still wins, so C is not critical. And if I drop D out, I get A, B, C, that still wins. So D was not critical either. Okay. Now I've filled out my table. Now I can count up how many times each individual voter was critical. Let's count for A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So A was critical. Six times. B was critical 2 times. C was critical 2 times. And D was critical 2 times. So A was critical 6 times. C, B, and D were critical 2 times apiece. Does that work? So those are the critical counts. And so the bonds off power index I always forget how to write that. Is it HAF on top? On top. I always forget if there's an H in there or not. Let me look. Oop. Bonds off power index. I always forget how to spell. All of a sudden, yeah, there was an H in there. I was right. For this system was that A would have a bonds off power index of 6/12. 6 over the total of my critical counts is 12. So of all the times voters were critical, A was critical 6 out of the 12 times. B was critical 2 out of the 12 times. C was critical 2 out of the 12 times. And D was critical 2 out of the 12 times. Now, by the way, that's kind of surprising because if you go back to the weights, A had a weight of 18, B had a weight of 15, C had a weight of 6, and D had a weight of 4. So by just looking at the weights, you would have probably guessed that B and A had similar power. But that is not true when the quota was 22. When the quota happened to be 22, it turns out that A has way more power than B, like 3 times as much. Like 6, 2. And C and D, you would have thought would have had less power than B, but it turns out having 6 votes versus having 15 votes is no different in this system. So that's kind of an interesting example of that bonds off power. That you look at the weights and you would expect one thing, but then when you actually calculate the power based on how many times each voter was critical, A has way more power than everybody else. In fact, A has as much power as the other 3 do combined. Any questions about this? So we list, when calculating the bonds off power index, you list out all the winning coalitions. Figure out how many times each voter was critical. That takes a minute because you have to, ask yourself, is A critical to this? Is B critical to this? You have to go through that whole table. And then once you've found those critical counts, critical count divided by total sum of all the critical counts is the bonds off power index. That work? Good. Now, obviously in our last example, I made the quota be 22. And that gave me a whole structure of which coalitions were winning coalitions and which coalitions were not. What if I took the same weights and I made the quota 30? I want you to calculate the bonds off power index for each voter here if the quota were 30. take a few minutes to do that. I'll give you some time. All right. So as I walk around, people are doing really well on this. Obviously, the quota is 30, so we're gonna naturally have less winning coalitions just because it takes more votes. So A and B together get us past 30, get us to 33 actually. So A and B together are a winning coalition. Obviously, there's no single winning coalitions, no single voters. So I'm looking for pairs. So A and B as a pair that wins. But A and C as a pair doesn't win. A and D as a pair doesn't win. There's no other pairs other than just A and B that win. So the only pair of voters that wins is A and B. Now, when you go to triples, I always just start by, throwing out D and then throwing out C and then throwing out B and throwing out A. So I'll test them all. A, B, C, yeah, that'll get us to above 30. So A, B, C is winning coalition. A, B, D is also a winning coalition. So that's just A, B plus attaching one of the others. If I try to do A, C, D, that does not work. That only gets me to 28. If I try to do B, C, D, that also does not work. That only gets me to 25. So we have two winning coalitions, A, B, C, and A, B, D, that are triples. And then obviously, if everybody votes together, if it's unanimous, then it is going to, then whatever they're trying to pass will pass as well. So there's actually only 4 winning coalitions here. A, B, C, A, B, D, and then A, B, C, D. Oh, oops. Let me try to delete what's in my previous table. Not messing the whole thing up. There we go. Okay, so A, B, D, A, B, C, A, B, D, A, B, C, D. Only 4 winning coalitions. Okay. Now with A, B, both are critical. Both A and B are critical because you drop one, doesn't win. Notice that in the winning coalition A, B, C, A is needed. You drop A, you get B, C, that still doesn't win. B is needed. But if you drop C, A, B by itself still wins. So C is actually not needed in the A, B, C winning coalition. Similarly, A is needed in the winning coalition A, B, D. B is needed in the winning coalition. D is not. Obviously, neither is C. And in the last one, the unanimous vote, it turns out A is needed still. If I drop A, you got B, C, D, that's not in here. It's not a winning coalition. B is also needed. If I drop B, A, C, D is not a winning coalition. C is not needed because A, B, D already wins. And D is not needed. A, B, C already wins. So you'll notice that in this case, once I've laid out the table, when you look at the critical counts, A has a critical count of 4. B has a critical count of 4. C and D both have critical counts of 0. That makes sense. So those are my critical counts. Again, if the quota was 30. And so the bonds off power in this scenario is A would have half the power, 4/8. B would also have half the power of 4/8. C and D would both have 0 power. You can write that as 0/8 or just 0. Either way. That makes sense? That's what happens when the quota was 30. Over here, if you remember, our quota was 22. There you go. Now, obviously, the point of this is to show you that even though we had the same weights in both systems, just changing that quota gave us a whole different power structure. C and D went from having, 1/6 of the power, 2/12 of the power, to having no power. And B went from having 2/12 of the power to having essentially half the power, just by switching the quota. So if you take a step back, if people are trying to decide on the quota, I would imagine that C and D would rather have a quota of 22 than a quota of 30. And person B would rather have the quota of 30 than the quota of 22 if they were smart about things, right? So we see that adjusting the quota can adjust the power. Now, adjusting the quota can adjust the power. That's true. But it's never going to make B have more power than A, because B always has less weight than A. Does that make sense? It can have B, it can make B have equal weight, or equal power to A. And the same thing is true with A and D. D has less weight, so it's never going to have more power than A. But you could devise a system where A and D had equal power. Okay. In fact, one system that always works to give everybody equal power is make the quota the total weight of the system. That way you have to have a unanimous vote. Does that make sense? Then that gives everybody equal power. So in this case, you'd have to make the quota 43, and you'd see that the only winning coalition is A, B, C, D. And then they're all critical ones. So all the critical counts will be 1, and they'd all have bonds off power index of 1/4. That makes sense? So there you go. And you can manipulate that a number of different ways. Okay. So let's do some, I will say, easy manipulation. We're not going to get into the big weeds of lots of voters and lots of different weights and all that kind of stuff. But let's do some easy manipulation with this system. We have a system where A has 51 votes, B has 49 votes, and C has 3 votes. So that's 103 total votes. Now we want our system to have a quota that's at least 50%, above 50%. So all quotas will need to be at least 52 or higher. Does that make sense? So we want our quota at least 52 or higher. But we could make it anything from 52 all the way up to 103. Does that make sense? So our quota must be from 52 to 130. I should say between. Got to be between 52 and 103. But what we make it, well, that's kind of based on us. We wanted to make it 75, we could make it 75. If we wanted to make it 52, we could make it 52. If we wanted to make it 103, we could make it 103. But each of those different quotas is going to give certain voters power and certain voters no power. Let's imagine I don't want to give any power to voter C. Okay? If I don't want to give any power to voter C, what should I do with my winning coalitions? Let me write this here. Let's give no power to C. What should the list of winning coalitions look like? Well, the winning coalitions, obviously, if we're having any system, unanimous is always going to win, right? So all 3 of them are going to win. But if I want to give no power to C, I want to be able to erase C and still have A, B win. So I want winning coalitions like this. Now there are lots of different quotas that give me these winning coalitions. All right, A, B together have 100 votes. I want you to notice I do not want A and C or B and C to win, right? Because that would make C critical. AC together has 54 votes. BC together have 52 votes. So in other words, I want to make my quota somewhere above 54 and under 100 or at 100. Okay, follow that? So I want 100 to win, but I want 54 to lose. That make sense? So we could make our quota above 54 and less than or equal to, I won't write or equal to 100. So I'll make the quota 80, or make the quota 55, or make the quota 100. It really doesn't matter. I'll just write 80, I guess. Sounds fun, right? Make the quota 80. That's well above 54, well under 100. You can see the games people can play here at trying to get a certain voter less power. Now, in the same vein, we could say, what if we wanted to take that system and make C have equal power to A and B? And I already hinted at this earlier. The easy way to make sure that every individual has an equal power is just to say, let's let the winning coalition be the unanimous vote. So you only get A, B, and C, and we get A and B together, or B and C together, or A and C together, all not winning, right? Right? So what I need to do in that case is, if I want C to have equal power to A and B, I need to make sure my quota is going to be above 100. If it's below 100, then A, B still wins. So I want my quota above 100 and less than or equal to 103. So we can make our quota like 102 if you want, or 101 if you want, or 103 if you want. That's your options. That make sense? So there are ways to have C have no power at all. There are ways to have the C have equal power to A and B. However, remember, C has less weight than A, so C is never going to have more power than A in a weighted voting system, no matter what the quota is. C is never going to have more power than B. but there are ways to give C no power. There are ways to give C equal power. Again, equal power is always the easy one. Just make sure you have everything unanimous. Force unanimous. In this case, there's another kind of tricky way to make everything have equal power, but it's harder if you make all the doubles. If you make your quota right at 52, then all the pairs work. And so C is critical 1, 2, 3, or 2 times. A is critical 2 times. B is critical 2 times. But that's the harder case to do. Making the winning coalition be all the votes. It's the easy case to make everyone have equal power. Does that work? Problems? So that was the second. C has as much power as B. Okay. Now, like I said, there are other methods to calculate power. One of them is known as the Shapley-Shubik power index. That uses winning sequences and something called pivotal positions. You don't need to know that one. We're not going to go over that one in this class. There are others as well, but the Von-Zopf power index and the Shapley-Shubik are probably the 2 most common. All right. The pivotal positions are sometimes hard to deal with, so we're not going to do that here. All right, so the Von-Zopf power index is the only one we're going to deal with. And so that's the end of the power measures section. That is 6.5. Now, since we're voting, since we're dealing with voting, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the main voting systems in America. Now, for most local elections and most statewide elections, we use plurality voting. When you go in to elect our congressional representative, everybody in our congressional district gets a list of candidates and they can vote for one person, and then the one person with the most votes wins. That's plurality voting. And it's pretty standard. Now, when we vote for president, it works a little bit differently. When we vote for president, that's a nationwide election. And we actually don't elect the president who gets the most votes, always. What we do is we use something called the Electoral College to decide our presidential winner. Okay. So the Electoral College comes from Congress. The US system has a bicameral legislature, did I say that right? Yeah. Where we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. The Senate has 100 voting members. The House of Representatives has 435 voting members. Okay. And the Senate, in the Senate, each state gets 2 senators. Now, the House of Representatives, those 435 voting members, are based on population. So that's what that apportionment stuff was all about. Although the House of Representatives, the apportionment method that they use is a little bit more complex than Hamilton's method or Jefferson's method or Webster's or Adams's method. Right. But it's fair to just to say that in terms of the House of Representatives, it's based on population. So some states get more representatives. California has a lot. And some states only have 1 representative. Wyoming only has 1 representative. Okay, California has like 40, something like that, 40 something maybe. All right, so each state gets at least 1 rep, but they're based on population. So the bigger states get more representatives, the smaller states get less. And then each state gets 2 senators. Okay. So what happens in most states, we might have changed this. How many representatives do we have now? I think they just redid that, didn't they? It used to be 14. Let me look. I'm gonna Google this. Actually, I can Google it up right here. I don't know why I did that. Number of representatives by state, right? There you go. How many does Michigan have? Michigan actually lost 1 in the last redoing of the apportionment. So we used to have 14, now we only have 13 because our population is not growing as fast as other places. Texas gained 1. So technically, this slide is wrong. Michigan has 15 votes, 2 senators plus 13 representatives. Is that right? You don't have to know the specific numbers. Okay. And so what's going to happen is that Michigan is going to vote for president. And usually what goes on in most states is that there's a plurality system for president, where you have a big list of candidates. We all vote for one of them. And then the vast majority of states, it's winner take all. So for Michigan, in the 2016 election, Donald Trump won Michigan. And so Donald Trump, back then Michigan had 16 votes. Donald Trump took 16 electoral votes for Michigan. And in 2020, Joe Biden won Michigan. And he took, I forgot, maybe either 16 or 15, I can't remember when the change happened. He took, let's say, 15 electoral votes. Does that work? So the presidential winner in Michigan gets all 16 votes, or in this case, all 15 now that we've lost a representative. Excuse me. And if you add up all the states along with DC, there's a total of 538 electoral votes. Now, if you take 538 and divide that by 2, you get 269. So what needs to happen is one candidate needs to get 270 electoral votes to win. So it's this system where the states determine their own elections, and then they divvy out these electoral college votes. Most states, it's a winner-take-all system. And so California might have 40 electoral college votes, and Wyoming may have 3, and so on and so forth. Okay. Here's some famous elections. I should say famous. In the 1976 presidential election, this is what the map looked like for the electoral college votes. I bring this up because notice in 1976, Michigan had 21 electoral college votes. Now we're down to 15. Okay. Texas used to have 26. All right. But again, it's been 270 to win for a long time, since we've had 435 representatives and 3 DC electoral college votes. Now, the main criticism that people have of the electoral college votes is that if everybody in the United States just voted, you don't necessarily get a popular vote win, meaning they don't win the plurality vote, if they win the electoral college. All right. The most recent example of that was 2016. Donald Trump won 304 electoral college votes. So that's a pretty broad margin in the electoral college compared to Hillary Clinton, who won 227. But actually, the number of votes won by Donald Trump was slightly less than the number of people who voted for Hillary Clinton. Okay, that's the most recent example, but that's happened a few times in history. Okay. John Quincy Adams. Now that was even more contested. The John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson election of 1824. The Rutherford B. Hayes over Tilden election in 1876. The Benjamin Harrison over Grover Cleveland in 1888. The 2000 election, George W. Bush beat Al Gore. And in 2016, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. All of those are examples of times where the person who got the electoral college win actually lost the popular vote, the so-called popular vote. Okay, so it's happened 5 times in history. Now with the John Quincy Adams, there are some shenanigans that went on, and I won't get into that either, but that's even more weird because there were other people in that race that took votes and they didn't want Adam Jackson to win, so they gave their votes to Adams, and that's kind of what happened, but. All right, so that's the main criticism of the Electoral College. I wanted to talk about what the Electoral College was, talk about the main criticism. And the reason why this can happen, that the plurality vote doesn't go hand in hand with the Electoral College, is essentially because of the way electors are represented. Montana has 3 Electoral College votes in 2020. California had 55 Electoral College votes in 2020. But when you actually look at the ratio of votes per people, in Montana, Donald Trump beat Joe Biden by about 100,000, but in California, Biden beat Trump by like 5 million, right? So the numbers for some of the small states, the gaps aren't as big as in some of the big states, okay? So if you want to do how many people per Electoral College vote in Montana versus how many people per Electoral College vote in California, turns out they're different, okay? There are other criticisms of the Electoral College. One is that it puts too much emphasis on, quote, swing states, unquote. Swing states is the term where states could likely vote either way. In the last couple of elections, Michigan was a swing state, kind of, where there's a lot of focus, at least at one point in the election, on, well, are the Republicans or are the Democrats going to win it? Okay. But states like California, states like Montana are not swing states. They're pretty overwhelmingly Democrat or overwhelmingly Republican. And so a lot of times those states get kind of ignored, and all of the money, all of the campaigning money goes into those swing states, the states that could kind of go either way, that are closer in voting, right? Now, those are some of the criticisms of the Electoral College. Now, the defense of the Electoral College, the first one is that the founding fathers never intended the presidency to be a popular vote. All right? The Electoral College was a compromise between electing president via a vote of congressional members. So like they went back and forth saying, well, let's just let the congressional members vote their conscience and not give the people a direct vote on the presidency. That makes sense. That was one side of it. So one side of it said, well, let's let the legislative branch actually elect the president directly. And the other side says, well, no, let's actually let the people elect the president. And so they came together. It was a compromise between those two, and they said, well, let's use the Electoral College. That way the people get a vote for president, but it's not a direct winner-take-all thing. All right? So, again, that wasn't the intention. was never the intention to have the presidency be the popular vote. Okay. And the founders, the people who designed the Constitution, talked a lot about the tyranny of the majority, in quotes. All right. You guys know what the tyranny of the majority is? That whatever the majority says, they get their way. Okay. And the people who designed our Constitution were worried about that. Okay, for legitimate reasons, because then minorities often get ignored. Minorities meaning small groups within the populace at large. Okay. So tyranny of the majority, they were worried about that. The other defense of the Electoral College is a different type of argument. And the other defense of the Electoral College is that we don't necessarily want our president just to represent, big cities and win. We don't want our president just to go to like the huge cities in the Northeast or the huge cities on the West Coast and forget about the interior of America or the quote flyover states or the quote flyover areas, right? Places without airports, and things like that. So to represent that, people have to at least pay attention to people in more rural areas of the country. That's the argument. I'm not arguing for or against, I'm just letting you know how that works. And then lastly, guarantees certainty to the outcome of the election. All right. We all know how it works. You can imagine if a president got elected on a plurality vote directly, and then districts in California saying, well, we need to recount our votes. And then in retaliation, someplace in Montana says, well, we need to recount our votes too. And then someplace in Georgia says, well, we need to recount our votes too. Could be kind of a mess doing that. And that's the next slide. Basically, this kind of minimizes the impact of people cheating the system. At most, right now with the Electoral College, you can just cheat one state in the system at a time if there was such a thing as cheating. All right. If something bad happens, you can have focused recounts, and it doesn't have to be the whole country recounting votes. All right, you can just focus those recounts in one state. And then sometimes if something bad were to happen in, let's say, a state like California or a state like Montana, it might not even impact the entire election. All right, because maybe their votes, the Electoral College votes there, wouldn't put one candidate versus another above that 270 mark. All right. And I don't know, people have all kinds of questions. If we should use the Electoral College to decide president, people who are more on the, let's just make it a majority vote. Those people argue, let's get rid of the Electoral College. Other people argue to keep it. If you do get rid of it, would it just be plurality voting? Would it just be something else? How would you decide what to use to elect the president with? Okay. Now, just so we know, when I say, well, could we get rid of the Electoral College? Because it's written in the Constitution, it would have to have a constitutional amendment to get rid of it, which is a very high bar for how many votes you need. Okay, so constitutional amendments are tough to come by. Needs high bars, high amounts of votes. But on the state level, there can be changes made if people want that. So for instance, right now on all the state levels, it's winner take all. So whoever wins Michigan gets all 15 of Michigan's votes. But you could make a state change. The state itself doesn't have to give all 15 votes to the winner. They could give proportionally. So in the next election, if it were a close election, maybe one candidate would have earned 8 votes and the other would have earned 7. That makes sense? There are some states that do that. There are also some states that say, well, here's our voting districts. The 2 senators are going to vote whichever way the overall state votes, but the individual representatives for a district could vote for the way their district voted. Does that make sense? So within Michigan, if there are 4 districts who vote for such and such a candidate, and 11 districts who vote for the other candidate, you could have the 4 and the 11, right, split their votes. So you could split votes in interesting ways on the state level, but the vast majority of states have winner take all. All right, there's only a couple that don't. Any questions about Electoral College stuff? No. All right. Well, I am going to stop there. Obviously, we finished up chapter 6. I did do the gerrymandering. If you want to watch a video on that, there's some videos on that online, specifically linked here. Okay. But make sure by Friday at 5 you get the test done and you get the homework done. If you need an extension on the test, just email me and let me know, and I can give you an extension on that test. But for right now, homework 6, 4, 6, 5, and then the bonus homework and then the test are all due Friday at 5. If you need an extension on the test or to get your second attempt, just email me and I'll give you that. Does that work? All right. Well, other than that, have a good weekend, and I'll see you later.